First, I want to thank the San Diego Chamber of Commerce for partnering with us on this event. When the city first released the Climate Action Plan in 2015, it was widely viewed as a bold move by the city into a more sustainable future. San Diego, with that Climate Action Plan, became one of the first large cities in the world to lay out a legally binding climate action plan with ambitious goals, like going to 100% renewable energy by 2035. Those bold goals came about after extensive outreach with the community. Through those outreach efforts, our horizon shifted as the community laid out their hopes and visions for the future. We're here today kicking off a new round of outreach to help guide the update of our 2015 CAP. The new Climate Action Plan, Our Climate, Our Future, will be an expanded vision for climate action in San Diego beyond 2035, driven again by the aspirations of our community. Today, we will have an open discussion on climate action and what the city can do to support positive change in our community. Your input today is critical to help us develop a locally focused climate solution or solutions that have the highest possibility of gaining success. So over the next 90 minutes, be open and honest with us. The mayor's office, myself, and members of our sustainability team will be participating and listening today. I know that together we can find solutions that'll lead us into a post-carbon vibrant economy. Although I won't be able to participate in the entire meeting, Mariah Saldana from our team will facilitate what I hope is a fruitful and informative conversation. Thank you all for joining. It's going to be a fun and interesting and an informative 90 minutes. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mariah to lead us into our conversation.
Thank you so much, Eric. So everyone knows today we're starting with the welcome, and then Ashley Rosia Tremonti will take it over next to go over our 2015 Climate Action Plan and what we've done so far. Then we will first have a whole group discussion. After that first discussion, we will go into the update of the Climate Action Plan called Our Climate, Our Future, the reasons and the background for that. And then from there, we'll take us all into breakout rooms led by members of our team to go more into the solutions that we need for updating that Climate Action Plan. And then finally, at the end, we'll have time for open dialogue and questions. So with that, I will pass it over to Ashley Rosia Tremonti, the program manager with our Climate Action Plan team.
Thank you, Mariah, and thank you for that introduction, Eric. My name is Ashley Rosia Tremonti. I'm a program manager at the City of San Diego. I've been working on implementation for the Climate Action Plan for the past 4 years, rather. And just to kind of help us all get orientated and make sure we all sort of have the same information moving forward, I'm just going to provide a few slides here of an overview of what our Climate Action Plan is and sort of the status of it as of 2020. So our Climate Action Plan in San Diego was adopted in December of 2015 with unanimous bipartisan support of our City Council and Mayor at the time. It is a qualified, or often referred to as legally binding, climate action plan, which means that our Climate Action Plan can be used for the purposes of streamlining through the CEQA processes for certain types of development. It also has an associated EIR along with the plan. Overall, it commits the city, and I mean our community-wide city, to achieve a 50% reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2035. So that is all of the greenhouse gas emissions that exist within the jurisdictional boundary of the city of San Diego. Getting a little bit more granular, the way that the city developed the strategy in order to achieve that reduction is by delineating 5 strategies, overarching strategies to achieve that goal. And they start with energy and water efficiency or reductions in that space, more access to clean and renewable energy, transportation and mobility, zero waste and achieving some of our ambitious waste goals, and then the concept of resiliency. Next slide. So climate action planning, just in general, is sort of an ongoing process, right? Our initial climate action plan would have kickstarted this process to occur with sort of that blue arrow in the planning phase, which if we kind of draw a connection to what we're doing here today, that's where we are with the CAP update, sort of setting the scope of the new document, defining the purpose, assessing climate impacts, and then looking at goals, strategies, and actions that can achieve a more ambitious goal, reduction goal. Moving into the lighter blue arrow, which is the ACT phase of climate action planning, we typically refer to that as implementation. So for this process, we're a bit doing both, right? We're sort of planning a new climate action plan, but also implementing the existing one. And then the observation, learning, and update process. And so that's very, I think there's a pretty much straight line to our monitoring reports that we've published recently, as well as the update process that we're currently on. You kind of see the loop closes a little bit there. But essentially the purpose of this information is to show that this is a process that continues on as part of having a CAP and implementing it. Next slide. This is our latest update that was published back at the end of December through our CAP annual reporting process as it relates to our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So as I mentioned, that's the overall goal of the CAP. That's the purpose of having a document like this, is to really reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and therefore your impact to climate change. Our latest update shows that we are at about 9.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That's what this graph is showing with the dark blue dot, relative to that solid orange line, which is our baseline of 12.9 million metric tons. And that reduction is the result of actions taken at the state, regional, and local level, as well as, this is a fairly new field. And as we have progressed over the past 4 years, accuracy within data and methodologies have updated as well. And all of that is making this information more accurate every year that we're able to report it. Next slide. In addition to sort of that environmental lens, which is typically focused around the GHG emissions, we also very strongly encourage the definition of sustainability to sort of have this 3-pillar approach, one of them being the environmental, the other being the economic, which I'll talk about here, and then the third being the equity or societal piece. Every year through our annual reporting process, we partner with Clean Tech San Diego and the San Diego EDC to develop an analysis of where clean technology jobs are both supporting our climate action plan and how our climate action plan can support growth in this job sector to ensure that our economy is becoming as sustainable as our environment. And so since 2010, we've seen an overall growth of 20.3% in this sector. And then these sort of colorful lines arching off this bubble, they represent growth as it relates to a specific CAP strategy. So those 5 strategies I mentioned before, we also do an analysis that takes that 20% and looks at where the growth is occurring relative to other space in the clean tech sector. So definitely the energy and water efficient buildings group is where we're seeing a lot of job growth in our last analysis in 2020. And solar installations really shed some jobs in 2019, which led to a slight decrease in the clean and renewable energy group. Next slide. So taking a moment, kind of the heart of the climate action plan, if you will, or sort of where the work is, are the actions and strategies that are laid out within it. You sort of have this overarching goal, and then what exactly are we going to do to get there? That is defined within the CAP, and that's going to be a big point of conversation as we're going through this CAP update, and hopefully today as we all get more time to talk to each of you in the breakout room sessions. So I'll quickly kind of go through these to give you an idea of what actions make up a CAP strategy. So in strategy 1, we're really looking at how we can reduce our energy and water consumption, again, citywide. But we do look at things from the municipal perspective. So how can the city itself look at its own energy consumption and make reductions there? How can we support our residents and businesses? We track and monitor energy consumption in that space and work on projects like our benchmarking program to help the commercial space report their energy usage and better understand sort of what their energy intensity is relative to sort of their peers or other buildings throughout the city. And then looking at our per capita water use consumption and actions associated with decreasing that, again, on a citywide basis. Next slide. Strategy 2, really focusing on clean and renewable energy, the type of fuel that our own vehicles use for waste hauling, or trash trucks, I think is a more typical term for that, as well as electric vehicles within the city's fleet. And of course, our 100% renewable energy goal that we have to ensure that 100% of our city, meaning our residents, businesses, and municipal operations, are consuming 100% renewable energy by the year 2035. An action within this strategy included a decision around whether or not to pursue a CCA, or community choice aggregator. Recently, as of 2019, we did establish a CCA organization called San Diego Community Power, which will start delivering power to customers this calendar year. Next slide. Strategy 3, officially called bicycling, walking, transit, and land use. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we typically refer to this as the transportation strategy or the mobility strategy. This strategy contains a pretty ambitious action within it to transition 50% of our resident commuter population, so those people who live in San Diego and travel to work by any means, to choose biking, walking, or transit as that means to get to and from work. Definitely a timely, I think, strategy to have a discussion today with our business community, as we are seeing more acceptance and expansion of sort of this work from home space, which has a benefit of removing a commute, but hearing sort of the multiple perspectives around that, I think, will be very beneficial. We also monitor items in here like how much is the city supporting this transition by infrastructure improvements, from sidewalks constructed to how many miles of bike lanes per year are being constructed to facilitate these types of mode shifts, if you will. Next slide. Strategy 4 is where we really get into zero waste and some gas capture from both the Point Loma wastewater treatment facility, methane gas capture rather, as well as our landfill. The city has a zero waste plan, and so we primarily track implementation of that plan and how much waste we are diverting from entering our landfill in any given year. This last figure was updated in 2018 and showed that we had a 65% diversion from the landfill. Next slide. We also included a strategy in the current CAP titled Resiliency, which sort of looks at measures beyond sort of those typical sort of consumption ones. And this is really more about carbon sequestration, if you will, if you all are familiar with that term. Our action within this strategy is to increase our urban tree canopy coverage to 35% by 2035. And so we track the number of trees that we are planting throughout the city, as well as the number of trees each year that the city sort of maintains or trims, as we know that the more that you do that, the faster your tree canopy will expand, as opposed to sort of starting from scratch with a brand new tree. Next slide. So with that, I'll throw it back over to Mariah to help break up this meeting a little bit so you don't have to have me talking at you the whole time. And we can do some interactive engagement with Mentimeter.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashley. So as I mentioned, if you can, please get out either your phone or open a new tab or a new window and go to menti.com, MENTI.com. Okay, and then you should see a different screen now. This is with Mentimeter. So you're going to put the code when it asks you for a code. The code to put in is 4006110, and I'll put that in the chat as well. We are going to be starting off with a couple of demographic questions today, just to get a sense of who is in the room. These first 3 questions, which have to do with your personal age, race, and income levels, the answers or the results are hidden. So please feel comfortable. You won't be sharing that information with the entire group, but when we get to questions about the businesses that you represent, those will be shared with the group. So I'm just going to give about 30 seconds per question here so that we can get through the demographics. And this is so that we have an idea of who we are reaching throughout all of our engagement for the Climate Action Plan update. And if you have any issues accessing Mentimeter, please let us know in the chat. Again, it is Menti, MENTI.com, and the code to use is 4006110. If you are calling in today, there will still be plenty of time to participate through speaking with public comment, or you can also, if you don't feel comfortable using Mentimeter, but you are using the web application, you can also put your thoughts in the chat. Again, it is Menti, MENTI.com. And the code we're using for the whole group discussion is 4006110. Thank you all so much for participating. Okay, so now we get to see who is here. Which cross sections of industry in San Diego are we hearing from today? Excellent. Okay, I'm going to advance, but you should still be able to insert your industry if you haven't had a chance yet. Roughly how many people does your business employ? Excellent. Only a couple more questions now. Is the gross annual income of the business you represent, does it, which category here does it fit into? And this one, the results should be showing up in a minute. Okay, we will advance. Just keep us going through these. So is your business registered either as a minority-owned business, women-owned business, veteran-owned business, none of the above, or prefer not to answer, or if you're not here on behalf of the business, and you can select as many as apply. Okay, last question. What neighborhood or community is the business you represent located in? If you're not here on behalf of the business, you can either leave it blank or put that in, that you're not here on behalf of the business. Excellent, thank you all. And again, if you are just joining, if you'd like to participate in this portion, you can go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and put in the code 4006110. Okay, thank you all so much for helping us with those demographic questions. And now we can get to the questions that we have for you. First, we are starting this forum by identifying the problems that we face or that the business community faces, either by climate change, climate legislation, or because of COVID. So then later today in the breakout rooms, we'll be able to focus on the solutions to these issues. But of course, to get to those solutions, first we need to identify what the issues are. So please take a minute and input how your business has been impacted by climate change. We do have time for probably about one comment per question. So if you would like to give comment for this, verbal comment, please raise your hand and then I'll be able to find you in the participant list, hopefully. And in the meantime, I'll read some of these that are coming in. So we created our business to help solve climate change. We make biodiesel fuel from cooking oil. less carbon than petroleum. Excellent. So flooding of Mission Valley, interesting. Shift in project priorities. Okay. And I'm sorry, for some reason the participant list isn't showing me any participants. Maybe Linnea or Chow, are you able to see if anyone is raising their hand?
I can, yeah. I'm not seeing anyone raising theirs yet, but I'll let you know if somebody does.
Excellent. Thank you, Linnea. Okay, legislative adaptations take time and money to adhere to. Giving attention to conserving resources. Constant focus on the carbon impact of power generation. Increasing in demand for sustainable investments. And again, if you joined and you haven't yet joined Mentimeter, you can either open a new tab or go on your phone and go to menti.com, menti.com, and then use the code 4006110. You can also include your comments in the chat like Richard has. So Richard shares material changes in how we make housing to respond to the impacts of climate change on both the physical and psychosocial issues. Okay. Anyone raising their hand for this question?
Not seeing anyone.
Okay. And if there's any issues raising your hand as well, please let us know. One person at least can just speak up. Hopefully it won't get too crazy. Okay, well, with that, I'll move to the next question then so we can keep moving on. Thank you all so much for including your answers in Mentimeter. These are incredibly valuable and we'll be analyzing all of them after the forum for any of those that I didn't read out loud, which are quite a few. So next question is, has your business been impacted by climate action or legislation? And if so, how? Oh, Richard, I see you raising your hand. You should be able to,
I'm learning how this works so that I can talk with you. The issue of how we create legislation and how it impacts the knock-on brief. We develop high-rise apartment buildings for affordable and workforce housing. The decisions we're making right now will be incorporated and implemented over 3 to 5 years is when efficacy is seen. So we have to be choosing these things today in an economic environment that's to be projected. We're concerned about legislation that looks to create and demand change that does not actually look at the knock-on impacts of how that then alters either financeability or construction costs, or in many cases, for us, we see it as just spending money for no apparent reason, no real effect, rather than actually applying funds to solutions. So our role is, when we look at these things, it's how do we create a solution that results in directly impacting climate change or energy use or any of the categories that will make it measurable, that becomes repeatable and scalable.
excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate you sharing that. Do we have anyone else who would like to give a verbal comment for if your business has felt impacted by climate action or legislation? And thank you all so much for submitting answers in Mentimeter. Okay, I'll read off some of the answers that have come in. So recycled water mandates for cooling towers, energy sector, Energy Star and city requirements and fees impose on developers. Others have said that they benefit from investments and incentives in renewable tech. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to our last question this morning. But you should still be able to enter it if you are still considering it or if you haven't typed out anything yet. And our last question is, or for this whole group discussion is what has the pandemic changed about your business that you would like to see carried forward? So a little bit more positive than the last couple of questions, but we're looking to identify what solutions you've had to come to during the pandemic that you would like to see continued. Yes, Richard?
You know, one of the things that we have been dealing with is how do we create buildings that are really smart and therefore offer massive bandwidth to our residents so that the whole building can be in Zoom meetings like this without losing capacity. That's one issue that deals with this. It then deals with the last comment I wanted to make had to do with someone who raised the issue of utilizing water, recycled water for cooling in San Diego, which we think is a brilliant model. And one of the things is how do you create incentives for building owners to want to do that? And that is going to involve your public utilities and how we create incentives that would provide economic relief for buildings either in connection fees or water use fees, or ways in which we can promote this type of sustainable activity as an accretive value to those investments, in which case developers will by definition want to participate and include that in their original programming. So that's a thought about how you can promote these ideas.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Are there any other raised hands for any public comment on either this question, what has the pandemic changed about your business that you would like to see carried forward, or either of our previous questions about climate action or legislation or climate change? Okay, excellent. Well, some things that I'm seeing here, the bonding of engineering and property management teams to do more with less, what we can do in-house versus sub out. Excellent. A lot of things around working from home, flexible work weeks, slow streets. Oh, here's a great one. The ability to virtually engage with teachers and students, the ability to work from home and thus less time spent on the roads and filling up parking lots. Maybe we don't always need to fly somewhere. Sometimes things can be done remotely. Excellent. Reducing energy and water use at work. Additional patios. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, last call for any verbal comment on any of the questions that we've asked during this open discussion portion. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for including your responses in Mentimeter. I greatly appreciate it. As I said, this was an exercise to identify the issues that we need to solve through the breakout rooms. So I will go back to the presentation and then pass it back to Ashley. You shouldn't be locked out of Mentimeter if you were still typing something. You should still be able to go in and give your comment. So with that, Ashley, if you'd like to take it back.
Sure. As I warned everybody at the top of the meeting, you'd be hearing my voice a lot, so here I am back again. But we're going to shift away from the existing climate action plan for these next couple of slides and talk now more about the update, sort of why are we all here. And so we're referring to the update, we branded it, Our Climate, Our Future. You'll probably see that logo around in various places, particularly in social media. Or if you've had an opportunity to go pick up a coloring book at the library, we have made several hundred of those available to folks. But essentially what we're looking at is, this is the scoping phase, if you will, of this update to the climate action plan. So we come to you today with no sort of draft document to really chew on. And that is, that's by design. We want input and a lot of thought given into the update to this plan before we start putting pen to paper or sharing out sort of the framework of the document. On the onset of this, though, we do want to frame it with sort of three very broad goals we'd like to achieve as part of this process. The first being setting a more ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction goal over a longer time horizon. So as I mentioned a few times today, our current goal is 50% by the year 2035. Where can we, looking out further into the future or through more ambitious actions, where can we take that goal moving forward? We also want to see this climate action plan really centered around the concept of climate equity. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail here in a minute, but really ensuring that our residents from our communities of concern, or our frontline communities, as they are sometimes referred to in the climate space, have their voices reflected within this process and within the document and throughout implementation of the CAP. And then lastly, the quantification and the connection to what are commonly referred to as co-benefits, or those additional benefits of climate action. So these were mentioned within the first iteration of our climate action plan, but really taking that a step further. And how do we sort of understand the entire universe of impacts that occur as a result of CAP implementation? And these types of co-benefits are things like air quality improvements, advancements in technology, cost savings on things like your utility bills, things of that nature. So those are sort of our three pieces of the framework that we sort of enter into this space with as we update the CAP. Next slide. This is a nice graphic demonstrating sort of a high level of our timeline for this process, so that everyone kind of get adjusted to when we anticipate sort of reaching the next phase of the update. We're currently in the light blue bubble, the creation phase, and you see there's sort of a learning line throughout all of it. So this is where we're taking in as much information as we can from our various stakeholders and our community members to better shape the design of a draft document and the content of a draft document. Later this year, we'll enter into the sort of the sharing phase, if you will, where we will have a new climate action plan to sort of discuss in more detail and start thinking through some of the specifics of it. And then finally, the yellow bubble you see on the right is ACT, and that really represents taking this forward to our city council for final approval. And then beyond this timeline, not shared as part of the CAP update, would be the implementation phase. So once we have a brand new climate action plan to move forward with, then we start that process. And kind of back to that slide earlier on, we start that giant circle of arrows again. Next slide. So thinking about a more ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goal, just to provide some context and information for folks today, we do love charts and sustainability. And the one here on the left is showing our original targets within the 2015 CAP. Those are those green dots that you see sort of on a downward trajectory over time, starting in 2020 and moving over to 2035. The black dots on the far left of this graph represent a greenhouse gas emission inventory that's been completed as part of our CAP annual reporting process. And that dotted line along this graph is sort of our updated trajectory. Like I had mentioned before, there's updated data and additional actions have been taken at sort of the state and regional levels. And so based on where our emissions are currently at, this is where we would anticipate to be per our goal year. There are other factors that impact the kind of goal that can be set within a climate action plan. One of them being the potential to align with where the state is going. And so just to provide some reference there, the state has an executive order to achieve zero carbon by the year 2045. And what that looks like per our graph is you see our black dotted line, our trajectory sort of flattens out at the year 2035. That's because we don't have a CAP that goes beyond that year. Where we see the difference in that dotted line and essentially the bottom of the graph, which would represent zero carbon, we tend to refer to that as our gap, or what is the space we need to close, what new actions do we need to identify in order to reduce that gap. And so really the kind of crux of this slide is really to demonstrate the importance of the overall goal setting for the climate action plan, and just give a little bit of reference of sort of what else is out there in terms of where others are heading when it relates to their own goals. Next slide. Centering on climate equity. So like I mentioned, that is one of the main goals of pursuing this CAP update, is ensuring that this document has a climate equity lens placed upon it throughout the entirety of it. And that really starts with this process of ensuring that we are engaging residents and stakeholders early and often, and that we are able to provide a climate action plan that represents those viewpoints and sort of desires, particularly from those areas we generally refer to as communities of concern. And I was going to just take a moment. So through our equity stakeholder working group and through the development of the city's climate equity index, we have defined what climate equity means to the city of San Diego. And so I'll take a moment now just to read that so that we're, again, sort of all starting with the same information. So climate equity is addressing historical inequities suffered by people of color, allowing everyone to fairly share the same benefits and burdens from climate solutions, and attain full and equal access to opportunities regardless of one's background and identity. And for anyone sort of familiar with the concept of redlining, this is a historical map here on the right of the city of San Diego, showing those areas that were basically redlined by lenders. Next slide. So this picture here on the right is this city's climate equity index, which is a project our sustainability department undertook beginning in 2019 to really quantify access to opportunity at the census tract level across the city. We've done this in partnership with our equity stakeholder working group, which some folks may be on the call today from that working group, and represents a little over 30 community-based organizations that have a focus within communities in San Diego that, again, are referred to as communities of concern. Next slide. Lastly, talking about co-benefits, and I talked a little bit about this already previously, but thinking about those additional and even quantifiable benefits that relate to those actions we can take in the CAP. Those are, how can the CAP better support things like, some examples are rather, how can the CAP support workforce development and quality jobs, again, technological advancements, safer routes for walking and bicycling, and really just San Diegans getting around, and how can that, in the context of this conversation, how can co-benefits like that support our business community and those customers that are traveling to and from your businesses. Reductions or savings on energy and water bills, or resiliency as it relates to energy and water bill increases, lower costs for transportation. Again, kind of thinking about the commuter in that respect, and maybe employees in that respect, and how we can utilize the concepts of sustainability to better support those who have a high transportation cost, improvements to air quality, which lead to the direct benefits of improved community health, active and healthier lifestyles, and the improvement of natural spaces. Next slide. So I will throw it over to Mariah to organize us all into breakout rooms.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashley. Yes, so we're going to switch to breakout rooms in just a minute here. These are led by different members of our staff and team. We're going to have 5 breakout rooms today. We're just having a couple of technical issues. So Linnea, so please also be patient with us as we switch to breakout rooms. So everyone knows Zoom is not always perfect. So Linnea, if you don't mind getting us sorted out. Please raise your hand if you have a question. If you're calling in today, you can do *9. You can also put your question in the chat, and we'll likely get to some of the previous questions that were in the chat as well. And yeah, and DK, we'll kick it off with you.
Yeah, thanks. I know we sort of touched on it in the intro, but as far as the this process goes for completing the CAP update, can we touch on that one more time? And I know obviously today is a feedback session. I know you've had a few of these, but can you sort of like help us understand what comes next in the city's process?
Yeah, so we're still in the engagement period, or the scoping exploratory period, for drafting the initial draft of the climate action plan. So we had a series of forums, and then we released a survey last year. We've engaged with about 2,500 people total in 2020 through these kind of virtual methods. We're embarking now on engagement specifically with community-based organizations in our communities of concern. So that period of engagement will happen over the next couple of months. At the same time, we'll be drafting the climate action plan itself and putting together new measures and actions for that document. And then once that is complete, probably around mid this year or a little bit later, that will go out for another round of public engagement. So we'll be able to take back to you, did we hear you right? Did we understand what your priorities and your needs were from the community? And then we'll put that back out to get more feedback on that. And then from there, we'll revise it again and we'll go to council for adoption and then action. Ashley, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, I believe you covered it, Mariah. Thank you.
So is that council action probably in 2020 calendar year, or you think maybe 2022?
Likely that I would assume that council action occurs in early 2022, but looking to have a final version of the climate action plan by the end of this calendar year.
Cool, thank you.
Excellent. I'm not seeing any other raised hands. Let me go to the chat. So John Porter asks, has San Diego contracted to have an environmental impact been conducted to assess vulnerabilities to climate change? So yes, we do have the sea level rise vulnerability assessment that was completed by the planning department, and that's available on our website. I can put it in the chat in a second. Oh, thank you, Ashley. And then we're in the process, or the planning department is in the process of putting together the Resilient San Diego plan, which is similar to the climate action plan, but focuses on adaptation to climate action rather than mitigation, like the climate action plan. And that includes a whole nother engagement process too. Craig, I see your hand up. You should be unmuted.
Thank you, Mariah. I heard in Ashley's comments earlier in the slide deck, a lot of talk about the co-benefits. I think one of the questions I have is, will there be a cost benefit analysis? So co-benefit may be 2 letters off from what I'm thinking, but maybe that's not a bridge too far for us to discuss, and just making sure that as we talk about the environmental benefit, that we're also discussing the costs of implementation for some of these more stringent standards and some of the requirements that might come from them.
Yeah, as part of our CAP update, I don't know that I would refer to it specifically as a cost benefit analysis, but better understanding the overall cost to implementation of an action is one of the actions we're trying to move forward in this as part of this CAP update. And it's also a best practice we're seeing across the state and in other climate action plans across the country, is to include that level of information moving forward. So that is, it's anticipated. And actually, if folks have been, if anyone's aware that we had an audit on our climate action plan go forward to our audit committee yesterday, that was also a recommendation within that audit to include costs associated with the climate action plan. So that is our intent to include that moving forward.
Thank you, Mariah. If I might just amplify a little bit, Ashley, one of the things that I noted in the conversation with the city of Chula Vista recently is that one of the ways that they look to justify actions that might increase requirements on the built environment is to talk about a return on investment or payback period. Sometimes those payback periods are longer than most property owners actually own buildings. And so it's not a really valid analysis. So I would just, I guess the second piece of it is I would encourage whoever is going to be tasked with doing that cost benefit analysis to actually reach out to those that make those decisions, the investment side and the payback side of those decisions, at least for the commercial real estate community. That's a really important discussion to have, because if you set a return on investment period that is 10 plus years, when most people look to have that recuperated over 5 years, because that's usually the lifespan of the building ownership or the product itself being installed, I think that's an important consideration.
Excellent, thank you, Craig. So not seeing any raised hands, I'll go to a question in the chat from Hinkle Smith. Is this climate action plan tied into the county level climate action plan? Is there a separate similar process being followed for the county level? So we are two separate jurisdictions with two separate governing bodies. So they are two completely different plans, but we do coordinate with the County of San Diego staff through the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative, and we regularly meet with them through SANDAG boards as well. So there's collaboration between the city and the county, but they are two distinct plans. Okay, and we have about just under 10 minutes left for questions. So definitely raise your hand or put in the chat if you don't feel comfortable speaking. Oh yeah, Katie?
I wanted to ask how the index you created was formed and how it differs from CalEnviro screen.
Oh, well, oh, perfect.
Sorry, Katie actually just responded to you in the chat as well, but essentially we put together an informal equity stakeholder working group with over 35 community-based organizations and communities of concern, and used all the indicators of CalEnviro screen and added 21 other indicators to assess the level of disparities in the city of San Diego. So we took CalEnviro screen, added to it, and are now able to see kind of the relative level of access to opportunity each census tract has within the city. And so I dropped in the link as well to the Climate Equity Index report, so you could read all the details there. And if you have any questions on it, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you. Congrats on that work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberto.
And that was Roberto Torres, our climate equity specialist at the city.
Okay. Any other questions or also comments? If you had anything that you wanted to share that you didn't feel you had a chance to during this meeting, now is also a great time, or you can put that in the chat as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Gabby.
Oh, in regards to that, the last point made about the different impacts in different communities around San Diego, it would seem like there might be an opportunity to assess how each could help each other in the event of disastrous impacts, given differential likelihood of various factors impacting them. I wonder if that's been included in that climate equity analysis. Or if it hasn't, that would seem like an opportunity to create greater collaboration among communities.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gabby. That's really great feedback for the resiliency plan. So I'll be sure to take note and pass that on to the planning team.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, then a question in the chat. Has the city considered rolling out a badge for businesses who make commitments to and progress on emission reductions? So we do participate in the San Diego Regional Green Business Network, and they do have badges, I believe, that you can put on your website or show that you are a member of that Green Business Network to show that you are a business that's committed to sustainability. And then maybe the chamber also has similar incentives or anything?
Yeah, that's something that we've discussed. I don't know that there's like a certification or badge per se, but I think maybe that's part of why we're engaging in this feedback now, is to find ways that we can play our part. I think I don't remember who made the point earlier, but we are all driving in the same direction. Obviously, maybe from different directions, but the goal is the same. So what we can do, or I guess doing whatever we can do to help just sort of incentivize our members, and whether that's from an educational standpoint or like I said, that pure incentive, that's what we're seeking to achieve here.
Thank you, DK. Okay, Ashley just dropped in the chat too. We have about 5 minutes left for questions, or we can always end it early if there aren't any additional questions. But especially if you leave this forum and you think of anything else that comes to your mind, whether it's a question or some feedback, you can always email us at sustainability@sandiego.gov. You can also sign up for our Climate Action Plan newsletter at sandiego.gov/sustainability. And then that is a monthly newsletter that shares all of the different engagement opportunities ceremonies that we have going on, as well as updates around implementation of the current climate action plan. Okay. Last call then for any questions or comments. Oh, Katie?
Could you speak to the city's approach towards adaptation rather than mitigation? And is it a separate plan? Will that adaptation work be included in this plan?
Yeah, so that's the Resilient San Diego plan that the planning department is currently putting together. And let me go in the chat really quick and I'll put the link to that as well again, just so everyone has it. So there is a separate engagement process that had a survey that was live, I believe earlier this month, but I don't think it's live anymore, that covers resiliency and those adaptation measures versus mitigation, like the climate action plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Okay. Excellent. Well, again, any thoughts after this can go to sustainability@sandiego.gov, and you all likely also have my email as well, but I'll put it in the chat just in case. That is msaldana@sandiego.gov. And I really can't thank everyone enough for attending today and sharing your feedback and thoughts for our Climate Our Future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all for putting this together. It's been a wonderful exercise. We hope to do it again sometime.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you everybody for sharing your time. We really appreciate it.